All right, Shalom to the elect. I want to start. Let me make sure the mic is on. All right, cool. Yeah, I want to start by giving all the praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Kakwadash. And what I said was I want to give all the praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, who is the Heavenly Father, in the name of His Son Yahweh Shai, who is the Messiah, in the name of the Holy Spirit. And double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone and Ruel. Peace, blessings, and salutations to the elect. And this lesson, I'm going to be going to the tribe of Reuben, all right, which are you so-called Seminole Indians, man, all right, who are Hebrew Israelites of the nation of Israel of the tribe of Reuben. As you see here, the 12 tribes of Israel charts on, right, and now you see down here, it says Reuben, which they are who? The so-called Seminole Indians, okay, and this is without a shadow of a doubt that the so-called Seminole Indians are the tribe of Reuben, all right. But today we're just gonna go through it, identifying the scriptures, and bring out some history, man. And Lord willing, it's edifying. If you can, the Spirit allows you to understand it, then hey, you know. But yeah, man. If you're a so-called Seminole Indian that's coming across this uh video, Lord willing, is edifying, man, and you realize that you're not, that pretty much you realize that you're a Hebrew Israelite, all right, of the tribe of Reuben, the nation of Israel. Okay, so right here, I'm going to just start with what the name Reuben means. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 29, verse 32. All right, because all of us 12 tribes, we have a forefather by the name of Jacob, okay, whose name was later changed to Israel. All right, and he had 12 sons, and his 12 sons, had children, and became tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, and we're them. All right, and yeah, man. But our forefather Jacob, he had, you know, multiple wives, right? Which is nothing wrong with that. Okay. And the Bible tells us we can have multiple wives. All right. But here, all right, Leah, okay, is one of his wives. Now, this is Genesis chapter 29 and verse 32. And it says, and Leah conceived. Leah is one of Jacob's wives. And Leah conceived and bare a son. And she called his name Reuben. For she says, surely Yahweh, which is the name of the Heavenly Father, the true name, hath looked upon my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. All right. Now, you look this up, right? Because you have to go in the words to get a better understanding. As our apostles and elders of Great Millstone tell us. All right. You look up Reuben, right? Now, it says, sure, so we call his name Reuben. Why? First, it says, surely Yahweh hath looked. Now, I just want to get this real quick. So let's look at the Hebrew word for the word look, right? Or look. And it's Strong's H, which stands for Hebrew, 7200, Ra'ah. And it says to see, look at, inspect, perceive, consider. So Ra'ah means to see, right? Now, let's go to the name Reuben, all right? It says she called his name Reuben. Strong's H 7205. Now, here, the way you will pronounce this is Ra'alban, okay? And it says, means behold the sun, all right? Because name has two, this name has two words in it put together. Ra'ah, which means see, okay? And it says, well, bun, but, and then bun being sun. It breaks it down right here, the etymology, Ra'ah, and then bun, which means, you see, sun. Okay? So Reuben, the name Reuben means see, it's a sun. Okay, that's really what it means. All right. Read it. Why I'm gonna read it again. Okay. Why he was named that. Genesis 29:32. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she says, surely Yahweh had looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Okay. And so once again, you have the patriarch Reuben, and he had descendants, which are, the tribe of Reuben. Okay. And they are you so-called Seminole Indians. Okay. Now, A lot of people like to say, when they combat the truth and, want to talk, and pretty much don't understand. Like they like to say that, they say that how can the so-called Seminole Indians be a tribe when you say Gad are the so-called Native Americans, and the so-called Seminole Indians are pretty much different Native American tribes coming together. Well, the response to that, right? My response to that, all right, be because when you go into prophecy, all right, in Genesis the 49th chapter, okay, regarding Reuben, okay, it tells what the tribe of Reuben would be. You see, you can't be two tribes, Israelite. You can't be two tribes at one time. All right, you know, if you're, for example, if you're of the tribe of Judah, okay, then you're a Judite. If you're of the tribe of Gad, you're a Gadite. So the same thing. If you're of the tribe of Reuben, you're a Reubenite. Okay, and so is so you have the spirit of a Reubenite. Okay, and the tribe of Reuben, those Israelites of the tribe of Reuben, their spirit would fulfill this prophecy that was spoken about them. All right, so even though you say okay, it was a bunch of Israelite, it's like a bunch of Native American tribes coming together, okay, to make up the so-called Seminole Indians. That still doesn't negate the fact that the tribe of Reuben would fulfill what's being written here, okay, and so those Native Americans, so-called Native Americans that came together, okay, and became became Seminole Indians and fulfilled this, all right, are Israelites of the tribe of Reuben, okay. They have the Reubenite spirits. That's why they fulfilled this. All right, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay, pretty much what I'm saying is, in shorter words, the Israelites of the tribe of Reuben fulfilled this. Okay, regardless of what Native American tribes they came from. Okay, trying to say it's multiple. They fulfilled this. Okay, and once again, you can't be an Israelite of two tribes. Okay, so the tribe of Reuben, you know, fulfilled this. So the Genesis 49 starting in verse 1, and says Israel's prophecy, because Jacob, our forefather, his name was later changed into Israel. All right. So it's Israel's prophecy concerning his sons. He had 12 sons, right? Genesis 49 starting in verse 1 through 2. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. All right. In the last days, you read Hebrews 1 and 1 and 1 and 2. Okay. You read Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. All right. It tells you that because it says, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his son. Right? So when the Messiah, Yahushua, was on the earth, in that time period forward, okay, is the last days, not just the time we're living in now. All right. So the time period where, this was fulfilled and, things we're going to read about came to pass, all right, are also part of the last days. Okay. So Jacob called his 12 sons together, all right, the 12 patriarchs, which will have, their descendants, which are us, the Israelites, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob pretty much told his sons what would happen to their descendants in the last days, right? Verse 2, gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Now, verse 3, Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength. Yeah, so this, all right, Reuben is the firstborn of the nation of Israel. Or pretty much he's the firstborn son. Okay. Reuben is the firstborn of the firstborn son of Jacob. Okay. So that's why he said that thou my first, my might, in the beginning of my strength. Okay. Now here it says the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Now I just want to first, it's all throughout this, man. All right, the excellency of dignity. Let me look at that word dignity real quick. All right, and I want to show some things. So Strong's H7613, the Hebrew word here is sha'ath. All right, sha'ath. And it says elevation. exaltation, dignity, swelling, uprising. And it says dignity, exaltation, loftiness. All right. So pretty much, all right, the tribe of Reuben, they have a very, you know, dignified spirit about themselves, and they have a ruling class mentality. Okay. And by the way, just to get all the meat off the bone, all right, said my might in the beginning of my strength. It says Reuben now my firstborn. Now, because you had this dude that was, that said what I was saying about how people say, um, how can you say the Seminole Indians are Reuben when they're made out of different Native American tribes? All right, now I gave the explanation I gave for it couple minutes ago just now, right? But one of those nations, or what's like one of those clans, right, are called that came together to make the Seminole Indians are called the Miccosukee, right? Now let me type in what does Miccosukee mean? Now let's see, where is it? No. Let's see. Maybe it's here. Better yet, let me just type it in here. Bear me just 1 second as I try to find this. I saw it before. I remember brothers had brought it out. Okay, here we go. Now it says here, facts for kids on biggerend.org. Now, here it says, how do you pronounce the word Miccosukee? It's Miccosukee, but here it says Miccosukee is pronounced Miccosukee. It comes from the Miccosukee word for chief. Sometimes spelled Miccosukee instead, but chief. Now, the chief of something is the first of something. So this is just another spiritual indicator to show you that, you know, that even though, because these are one of the Native American clans, all right, that came together, all right, to that which you know came together making a Seminole tribe. But however, these were Reubenites, that came to, pretty much these Reubenites, these Native Americans that had these Israelites that had the spirit of Reuben, being a tribe of Reuben, they have their spirit is the tribe of Reuben, fulfilling this. Okay. But this is just another spiritual indicator to show you. It says chief, and then once again, Genesis 49, it's a Reuben out my firstborn, my might, in the beginning of my strength. Okay, so I just wanted to, make that clear. I meant to show that before. All right. But once again, it says the excellency of dignity. So once again, the so-called Seminole Indians, all right, they have a dignified, you know, aura about themselves. Okay, that ruling class mentality, and it shows in the fact that they didn't sign any peace treaties. All right, you know, even in the way that they dress, man. And actually, okay, I typed in on Google, what does Seminole Indian clothing say about them? Right, and it says Seminole clothing conveys a sense of pride. See, history and adaptability, and reflects a Seminole people's rich heritage and connection to the world. We see it says it conveys a sense of pride. All right, and you know, that once again that dignity. Now I got the definition of the word dignity here, and it says the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect, a composed, serious manner or style, a sense of pride in oneself, self-respect. You see? So yeah, there's some so-called Seminole Indians, they carry that pride and dignity about themselves, man. They have a ruling class mentality as well. It shows, and it shows different, it shows in certain ways. Now I have this website here, right? And Seminole Tourism, FloridaSeminoleTourism.com, right? And it's just going, talking about their the way they dress. All right. Now this came out June 16, 2023, right? So last year from now. But it says, I'm not gonna read all of this whole website, but it says Seminole fashion, a vibrant reflection of culture and resilience. What does resilience mean? Resilience, the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. So, you could say, a sense of dignity as well, regarding the word resilience, but it shows in the way that they dress. But it says Seminole fashion has long been synonymous with Seminole tourism, colorful patchwork, intricate dolls, and beadwork, all hallmarks of Seminole fashion that can be seen throughout the many decades of Seminole tourism history. This week, join us to explore Seminole fashion, how it has shifted over time, how it's become an important part of Seminole tourist ventures, and it became a reflection of Seminole resilience and culture. We will explore hairstyles, patchwork, and beadwork as we trace the cultural importance of Seminole fashion on the tourism industry. In this week's featured image, you can see fashion show contestants showing off their entries at a rodeo on the Brighton Seminole Indian Reservation in 1983. The State Archives of Florida hosts the image through the Florida Memory Project. Seminole fashion shows and clothing contests have a long history and are popular at Seminole events. Interested in seeing the Seminole clothing contest yourself? All right. Okay. But you could check this website out, going to show them how they dress and everything. All right. Another picture. Okay. But they carry themselves very dignified. They have a a ruling class mentality about that, man. Once again we went to that word dignity, it said elevation, you know. They have a sense of they have a ruling class mentality, a high dignity of themselves, man. And even in the fact that they didn't sign any treaties. Now, I got here on Wikipedia Seminole Wars. Okay. Oh, by the way, Sloggy, let me show more of the way that they dressed. You see picture here. You know, um, this is a picture of one of their chiefs, Osceola. Okay, which we're gonna get into later. Just touch on a little bit. All right, Osceola. All right, but look at the point is look at the way that he's dressed. You see, you know. All right. Here, you got a Reubenite family. Okay, and they're part of the Northern Kingdom. The tribe of Reuben is a part of the Northern Kingdom of Israel. Okay, but just that shows in the way that they dress. Now, another way it shows, right? So now Seminole Wars on Wikipedia. Now it says the Seminole Wars, because remember the scripture also said what? The excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Now, before I read it, right? Because normally, we read power in the Hebrew and, we think of the Hebrew word Allah, meaning power, God, or judge, right? But here, I looked it up. Now it says Strong's H5794, and the Hebrew word here is eyes. All right, eyes. It says strong, mighty, fierce. In the Strong's definition, strong, vehement, harsh, fierce, greedy, mighty, power, roughly strong. So it's going into the tribe of Reuben being strong, a mighty tribe, a warrior tribe, which they were, which I'll read, Lord willing, in a minute. You go to the root word, Izaz, Strong's H5810, Izaz, and it still goes into being to be strong, prevail, to make firm, strengthen, harden, to be stout, impudent, prevail, strengthen, self, be strong. See, so it's going into them actually having this characteristic about them, so being pretty much it's like being a strong tribe. Okay, now says the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Now Seminole Wars. I'm gonna read a little bit out of this and jump around here. So it says the Seminole Wars. All right, let me just close these out. When did I finish with it? Hold on a second. Okay, so it says the Seminole Wars, also known as the Florida Wars, were a series of three military conflicts between the United States and the Seminoles that took place in Florida between about 1816 and 1858. The Seminoles are a Native American nation which coalesced, which I believe that word pretty much just means to a bunch, pretty much different Native American tribes joining together. Okay, and once again, the tribe of Reuben had a certain prophecy about them that they will fulfill. So even though those Native American clans joined together, there's still tribe of Reuben. Those Israelites had, were of the tribe of Reuben. They had a Reuben, that their spirit was the tribe of Reuben. All right. Which is why they had fulfilled that prophecy in Genesis 49. Okay. But it says, which coalesced in northern Florida during the early 1700s when the territory was still a Spanish colonial possession. Tensions grew between the Seminoles and settlers in the newly independent United States in the early 1800s, mainly because enslaved people regularly fled from Georgia into Spanish Florida, prompting slave owners to conduct slave raids across the border. All right. It says a series of cross-border skirmishes escalated into the First Seminole War with American General Andrew Jackson. And this is a fucking devil, man. He messed with Gad as well, tribe of Gad as well. Okay? Fucking devil, man. All right, said. And we're going to see him in the kingdom. All right, it says, led an incursion into the territory over Spanish objections. Jackson's forces destroyed several Seminole, Miccosukee, and Black Seminole towns, which you get to touch on a little bit, as well as captured Fort San Marcos and briefly occupied Pensacola before withdrawing in 1818. The U.S. and Spain soon negotiated the transfer of the territory with the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. Now, moving on, it says the United States gained possession of Florida in 1821 and coerced the Seminoles into leaving their lands in the Florida Panhandle for a large Indian reservation in the center of the peninsula per the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. So says coerced, which I want to get that word coerced real quick, which coerced just says persuade an unwilling person to do something by using force or threats. Okay. So it says coerced the Seminoles in leaving their lands in the Florida Panhandle, okay, for a large Indian reservation in the center of the peninsula per the Treaty of Moultrie Creek. So the U.S., these devils, they came over here pretty much, and they were trying to persuade the tribe of Reuben to leave their own land and move to a Indian reservation, which says here an American Indian reservation is an area of land held and governed by a U.S. federal government recognized Native American tribal nation. So it's an area of land the government said, y'all move over here because we want to come here. That's what they did to Reuben. They pretty much said, nah, y'all got to move. Like imagine you in your house, and if somebody knocks on your door and said, "Nah, you got to leave because we want to live here." Picture that. So this devil, the so-called white man, you can't deny that so-called white man wasn't a part of this because, I mean, who else? It wasn't Israelites that was at the helm of this thing. The United, the U.S. Army and everything. Oh, these was the so-called white man, Esau, man. All right, but you know they're the devil, man. So white man is the devil, and this is a part of the history. This is literally on Wikipedia. The free encyclopedia. An encyclopedia pretty much means a bunch of books combined to bring out a point or to further back a certain topic. I believe I forget the exact definition. But either way, right? Continuing on, it says in 1832, by the Treaty of Payne's Landing, however, the federal government under the United States President Andrew Jackson demanded that they leave Florida altogether and relocate to Indian Territory, modern day Oklahoma, as per the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Now it says the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was signed into law on May 28th, 1830 by United States President Andrew Jackson. The law, as described by Congress, provided for an exchange of land with the Indians residing in any of the states or territories for the removal of the Eastern River. You know, it's crazy, man. It says a few bands reluctantly complied, but most resisted violently. You see that? A few bands reluctantly. Let's look at that word, reluctantly. Reluctantly, it says in an unwilling and hesitant way. You know they complied, but it said reluctantly. But it said, and that was just a few of the Seminoles, so-called Seminoles that complied. But most resisted violently, leading to the Second Seminole War. And they said that this was the bloodiest and harshest conflict out of all three wars, the Second Seminole War. And it says, which lasted from 1835 to 1842. It says, which was by far the longest and most wide-ranging of the three conflicts. Okay. It says initially less than, and I'm gonna get some things about this, okay? Because it's some very good. It's very interesting um, pieces of history in here. And at the right, you know, of the screen says Seminole Wars. The belligerents, people who I believe involved sides, but then it says commanders and leaders, and I looked up these different leaders. Okay, these are for the United States on the left side, on the left, and on the right, because it's spiritual. On the right, you got these different Seminole Indian leaders. Okay, which we're gonna get to in a minute. All right, but it says initially less than 2,000 Seminole warriors employed hit and run. Oh, it's like the point up here. A few bands reluctantly complied, but most resisted violently into the Second Seminole War. So, and that shows what? Once again, the excellency of dignity. You know, dignity. How's it dignity? Because think, if you think highly of yourself and you carry, a sense of pride in oneself, you're not just going to fold to anything. You're not just going to bow down to anything. You're not just going, you're not just going to, just you're not just going to, let it happen. Okay. Now they had some dignity, man. They had a sense of pride in themselves, man. Okay. Which is why they was like, because Esau wanted to come and move them out of their land, but they like, nah, we're not gonna go like that. All right. Now we're not gonna just up and out of here. You crazy? You know? So no, they fought back. Now did they take them down? No. All right, but they fought back, man. The excellency of dignity. And it said which was fought by far the longest and most wide-ranging of the three conflicts. And then once again, the excellency of power. Okay, they're a very powerful tribe, man. They're a warrior like tribe. All right. Now it says once again, initially less than 2,000 Seminole warriors employed hit and run guerrilla warfare tactics and knowledge of the land to evade and frustrate a combined U.S. Army and Marine force that grew to over 30,000. You got to think if it's less than 2,000, frustrating a combined U.S. Army and Marine force. Come on now, you mean tell me this ain't Reuben? This ain't the excellency of power right here? All right, it says instead of continuing to pursue these small bands, American commanders eventually changed their strategy and focused on seeking out and destroying hidden Seminole villages and crops, putting increasing pressure on resistors to surrender or starve with their families. Okay. Um, you know, it goes in the third Seminole War. But I really, want to talk about different things about the second Seminole War, right? Now, first, okay, I'm gonna just get a couple of these Seminole Indian leaders, show pictures of them. It also shows their dignity, the excellency of dignity. Now, this first one is Abiaka. All right, that's Abiaka, also known as Sam Jones, was a Seminole Miccosukee chief, warrior, excellency of power, and shaman who fought against the United States during the Seminole Wars. He was born among the Miccosukee people of Georgia who would migrate south into Florida and become part of the Seminole tribe. He initially rose to prominence among the Seminoles as a powerful shaman. Abiaka became the principal chief of the Seminoles in 1837 during the Seminole War. So this was an actual chief, right? It says he was a guerrilla warfare tactician. Look at that word, tactician. Tactician. It says a person who uses a carefully planned strategy to achieve a specific end. Yeah, once again, he was good at this. So he was a tactician at guerrilla warfare, excellency of power, man. And he led the Seminoles at the Battle of Lake Okeechobee, which I really want to talk about. As they said, that was one of the most major events of the Second Seminole War. It says the largest battle of the conflict. See, Abiaka successfully resisted the United States and its policy of Indian removal, and his leadership resulted in the continued presence of the Seminole people in Florida. You see? So they successfully resisted at one point. That's why, once again, Jacob gave that blessing or that prophecy and the excellency of power. You see? Excellency of power, man. Now, moving forward to another leader, Micanopy. I ain't gonna read all of it. I'm just, read a little bit. Um, there's another chief during the Second Seminole War. Really, because I don't really go. Oh, let me check this out. Let me read this right here. It says his name was derived from the uh, Hittite terms Miko, which means chief, and Naba, meaning above. Conse- uh, consequently, meaning high chief or like or the like. And that just even sound that just sound like it's just spiritual, man. Because high chief, come on now, Reuben, now my firstborn, Miko meaning chief, and a high chief. We in our Israelite culture, we have what, a high priest. Okay, it's just connecting it to the spirit, man. But one thing I want to point out about him is when putting different pictures, you see how he's dressed. Okay, and then down here, another one. All right, is this not dignified? Look at the way he's sitting, man. That's a dignified stance right there. The way he's dressed. It's dignity. That's dignity, man. You know, very ruling class, like. Okay, and so I wanted to point that out about him, right? Now, continuing on, I'm gonna skip over Osceola. I want to get something about him in a minute. All right, but let me go to this man named Tiger Tail. Okay, and it says here, um, Tloko Tustanugi, if I'm saying it right, also known as Thoko and Tiger Tail, was one of the most prominent Seminole leaders in the Second Seminole War. He spoke English fluently and also spoke Muskogee. Tustanugi was one of the three leaders of the 300 Seminoles who fought in the battle that became known as the Dade Massacre. I'm going to get that in a minute, too. So during the war, he and Halleck Tustanugi, another prominent Seminole leader in the war, met with General Walker Keith, um, Walker Keith Armistead, which is this man right here, a military officer, all right, says to negotiate, but negotiations broke down and the war resumed. As the war waned, Armistead used money to bribe several Seminole leaders to surrender. Tustanuggy, Senator Tustanuggy or Nuggy, I believe it's Nuggy, refused to be bribed, and he continued to lead his band in fighting. When the war ended, his Seminole band was one of the few that remained in Florida. Okay, but it said, I believe it was one of the Black Seminoles. I could be wrong. Maybe somebody else, Salaki. All right. Now, Chipko, this man here, right? Um, okay, I'm gonna read a little bit about him. Another Seminole Indian war leader. Chipko, also known as Echo Amathla, was a 19th century Seminole Indian chief and warrior. He was one of the most prominent Seminole chiefs during the Seminole Wars. And by the end of the conflict, he was the main leader of the Muscogee-speaking band of Seminoles of Florida. At a young age, Chipko and his family of Red Sticks fled as refugees to Florida because of the War of 1812, where they joined the Seminole tribe. As Chipko grew older, he became a chief and eventually fought against the United States in its policy of Indian removal. Chipko was one of the Seminole leaders at the Dade Battle, where Seminole warriors successfully ambushed a column of the U.S. Army and killed over 100 U.S. troops. And the thing is, I believe it was more U.S. troops. No, it wasn't. All right, well, I'm gonna read more, but that's basically what happened at the Dade Battle. All right, Reuben, they successfully ambushed, a bunch of U.S. Army men, all right, and killed them, and they won that ambush. It says this battle started the Second Seminole War, which Chipko would fight in through its entire duration. By the end of the Seminole Wars, Chipko and his band had successfully resisted the United States and were part of the group of Seminoles who remained in Florida. And they were the only Seminole band who continued living in Central Florida. So you see, they resisted. Once again, excellency of dignity, and they fought throughout the entire war. Excellency of power. All right. Now I'm gonna skip over Osceola. All right, but I want to go into just read the ones that's here, a little bit about the ones that's here. Okay. All right, this was the one I was talking about, was Black Seminole. But it says John Horse, also known as Juan Caballo, Juan Cavallo, John Coya, and Gopher John, was a man of mixed African and Seminole ancestry who fought alongside the Seminoles in the Second Seminole War in Florida. He rose to prominence in the third year of what was to become a 7-year war, when the first generation of Black Seminole leaders was largely decimated, and the primary Seminole war chief, Osceola, to the primary Seminole war chief. All right. You know, and it's the reason I'm skipping over him, because he has a great story as well. It says fell into the hands of the American military commander, General Thomas Sidney Jessup. All right. But the thing with these Black Seminoles, right, because, and apostles and brothers went into this a little bit, but it said the Black Seminoles and Afro Seminoles are an ethnic group of mixed Native American and African origin associated with the Seminole people in Florida and Oklahoma. They are mostly blood descendants of the Seminole people, free Africans, and escaped former slaves who allied with Seminole groups in Spanish Florida. So it's pretty much Jake fleeing slavery, all right, to another tribe, the tribe of Reuben that was there, So, through this, being that we all Israelites, through the spirit is like, it's through the spirit, we linking up and stuff like that, you know. And it says, and you have descendants of them today, you have descendants of these so-called Black Seminoles today. It says many have Seminole lineage, but due to the stigma of having mixed origin, they have all been categorized as slaves or freedmen in the past. All right. But this is a picture of John Horse here. Okay, you see he has features of a so-called black man. Nose, the lips. All right. And then last but not least, Olata Miko. All right. And this I read something about him, man. Just definitely goes to show. All right. And this is a picture of him, you know. I believe that's an actual picture of him too. See? But it says Holata Miko, a Muskogee name translated as alligator chief, known in English as Chief Billy Bowlegs or Billy Bowleg, was leader of the Seminoles in Florida during the Second Seminole War and was the remaining Seminoles' most prominent chief during the Third Seminole War, when he led the Seminoles' last major resistance against the United States government. With the possibilities of military victory dwindling, he finally agreed to relocate with his people to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, in 1858. As part of the settlement, he was paid $6,500 plus $1,000 each for the sub-chiefs and $100 each for the women and children who went with him. Several sources claim that he is buried at the Fort Gibson National Cemetery, but it is disputed whether the grave marked Captain Billy Bowlegs is actually his or that of a different Billy Bowlegs. All right. This is another image of him. This is like a drawing or painting or something. All right. But something I want to point out. Right. Was it here? Had to be. Slovakia. I might have. I think I might have skipped a part because it's something I wanted to bring out when one of the chiefs had done. All right. It wasn't him. Might have been Chipko. No. Wait. Okay. Now, well, this ain't it. What I was specifically looking for, but this is another one I forgot to talk about. Now, when this Commander Chipko, this once again shows excellency and dignity. Now it says, oh wait, let me read this one. It says, while a temporary peace had been achieved in Florida with the end of the Second Seminole War in 1842, tensions between Seminoles and white Floridians still remained. Even though the war was over, the U.S. government still tried to get the Seminoles to leave Florida through negotiations and bribery. Okay, so they're trying to get them to leave, but you see that resistance, right? It says Chipko himself stated that he would never leave Florida, and he also boasted that he, what? Zooming right here. And said, I'm gonna read it again. Chipko himself stated that he would never leave Florida, and he also boasted that he didn't for all the crackers in Florida. You see, and that's cited that he said that. You see the excellency of dignity, man. That's Reuben. All right, but it says all right, I'm gonna read that part now. Going down, okay, down here, we'll just bring out something he did. It says during his visit, Pratt commented on how fertile the soil around the village was, on the abundant amount of crops grown by Chipko's band. Pratt told Chipko that he had come to see what kind of help the government could give to his people, right? At the end, because he said Chipko, he had, um, became somewhat, kind of friendly with white settlers, white people in Florida, all right, you know, and then this man Pratt came around, you know, tried to see what help, tried to see what, was pretty much offering governmental help to his people. But what did it say? It said, but Chipko dismissed any offers for help from the government, saying that he did not want to hear any Washington talk. You see, there's that excellency of dignity, man. There's really one that shows it. Oh, man, I really want to find it, man. Oh man, really, really want to find it. Okay. Uh, might be later on. Okay, but all right. So let me just make sure. All right. Let me just see. All right. Just trying to make sure something real quick. Bear with me 1 second. Trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, the bow legs. All right. Now, let me read this. It says Bowlegs and his band lived in relative peace until 1855. A group of army engineers and surveyors invaded his territory in southwestern Florida, where they cut down banana trees and destroyed other property in the course of building forts. Some historians have viewed these actions as intentional provocation to make Bowlegs react, so the settlers will have a reason to force the Seminole out. If so, the provocation worked. Bowlegs led his warriors in sporadic attacks against settlers for the next few years. In what is known as the Third Seminole War, the army was unable to subdue his guerrilla warfare. So the fact even that the tribe Reuben brought out guerrilla warfare on Esau shows how that excellency of power. That's another show of that excellency of power. Okay, now going on right, because this is what led to the Second Seminole War, which was uh, most one of the most talked about. It's like one of the most bloodiest and longest wars, right? And this one is called the Dade Battle. The Dade Battle, often called the Dade Massacre, was an 1835 military defeat for the United States Army. All right, it says under the U.S. Enemy Removal Act, the U.S. was attempting to force the Seminoles to move away from their land in Florida. All right, now it says here, 2 U.S. Army companies numbering 103 men under the command of Major Francis L. Dade. All right, so we have a picture of him. No, but it says two U.S. Army companies numbering 103 men under the command of Major Francis L. Dade were ambushed by approximately 180 Seminole and Black Seminole warriors as they marched from Fort Brooke on Tampa Bay to reinforce Fort King and Ocala. Only 3 U.S. soldiers and their guide, Louis Pacheco, survived the attack. So, out of 103, only 3 U.S. soldiers and their guide, Louis Pacheco, survived the attack, and one died of his wounds the following day. You see that excellency of power, man. Once again, uh, excellency of dignity and excellency of power. All right. Now, it says the battle sparked the Second Seminole War, which ended in 1842. By that time, most Seminoles had surrendered and been transported out of Florida, and small group remained in Central Florida. See Chipco's band, while another portion had moved further south to the edge of the Everglades and the Big Cypress, see Abiaka and Huatanamico. There was no formal treaty ending this conflict, which was another chapter in the long-fought Seminole Wars. Now this is the battle, okay? No. Okay, now jumping down. All right, you can read more of this on your own if you want. All right. But the aftermath of this Dade battle, because this is what they said led to the Second Seminole Indian War. All right. And this, so Reuben kicked their ass right here, man. All right. But jumping down, it's aftermath. It says after the battle, many large plantations were burned and settlers killed. By the end of 1836, all but one houses in what is now Miami-Dade County and Broward County had been burned by the Indians. The Indians were emboldened by their successes against Dade's command. The stalemate at the subsequent battle of, how you say this? Battle of Withlacoochee, and the killing by Osceola of Indian agent Wiley Thompson on the same day of the battle, which is what had delayed Osceola, while about half of Dade's men consisted of new American immigrants. The rest of the killed soldiers were from many other states. Now, it says news of the battle was reported in the Daily. So this made headlines. Okay, they put Esau on in a an old fashioned sense. They put Esau on the news. All right, they put his ass on the news. Man, it says News of the battle was reported in the Daily National Intelligencer, Washington, D.C., in the Wednesday, January 27th, 1836 edition as follows. Now, you could try to look this up. I try to look it up, but if you have time, you could probably look it up, find it in an archive or something. All right, but it says Major Dade with 7 officers and 110 men started the day before we arrived for Fort King. So we were all prepared to overtake them the next day. When an intervention of circumstances deferred it for one day, and in the course of that day, 3 soldiers, horribly mangled, came into camp and brought the melancholy tidings that Major Dade and every officer and man except themselves were murdered and terribly mangled. You see, this is all part of, once again, that excellency of power. All right, and this was reported in the headline. So 3 out of 103 men made it back alive. Okay, that's something, man. All right, but moving on. Like I said, the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. All right, now this. Let me just make sure something. Salakia. And I know it's kind of long. Long lesson. It's just some good history in here, man. All right, but this one now, the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. Right, it says the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. This is a picture of it. Okay, like a little drawing. Somebody had made. All right. So the Battle of Lake Okeechobee was one of the major battles of the Seminole Wars. It was fought between 1,000 U.S. Army troops of the 1st, 4th, and 6th Infantry Regiments and 132 Missouri Volunteers. All right. It says, under the command of Colonel Zachary Taylor, this guy. Okay. Zachary Taylor. This man says was the 12th president of the United States, served from 1849 until the death of 1850. All right, but I didn't even know that. But it says about 400 Seminole warriors, led by Chiefs Abiaka, Billy Bowlegs, and Wildcat. All right, on December 25th, 1837. That's the thing, all right? Because I forgot to bring this up. Wildcat. I was going to bring it out, but just like the name Wild. Okay, it says here Wildcat, also known as Koakushi, says Wildcat was leading Seminole chieftain during the later stages of the Second Seminole War, the nephew of Micanopy. Now, the scriptures say about Reuben, right? Genesis 49:4 now says, unstable as water. All right. Now, unstable, going to, because the tribe of Reuben is a very warrior, is a warrior tribe, And the name Seminole, the word Seminole, as you see here, okay, it says, member of a native people, formerly of Florida, allied with the Creeks, 1763. It says here, meaning what? Wild, untamed runaway. You see? And so there should be no doubt about the fact that the so-called Seminole Indians are the tribe of Reuben. Even when you look at this word unstable, right? Strong's 863:49, because, and it says recklessness, wantonness, unbridled and frothiness. All right. Let's see, etymology of the word. To be wanton, be reckless. Man. It's a tribe of Reuben. And then you had a whole general literally named Wildcat. Okay, Seminole means wildcat. So you just see these different things through the spirit, man. All right. It says the Seminoles defended, continuing on right here. This is going to the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. Right, but it says continuing right here. It says the Seminoles defended a large encampment by Lake Okeechobee against an attack by Zachary Taylor's troops. So it's like 1,132 uh, men on the side of the U.S. Army versus about 400 Seminole warriors, and the Seminole warriors pretty much won, for a second, you could say. So the Seminoles defended their large encampment by Lake Okeechobee against an attack by Zachary Taylor's troops. See, Zachary Taylor's march to Lake Okeechobee was part of a larger offensive into South Florida that was planned by General Thomas Jessup. The battle was a victory for the Seminoles as they held. See, the battle was a victory for the Seminoles as they held off the U.S. troops long enough to safely evacuate their encampment. Due to the large amount of casualties his troops suffered, especially among the officers, Zachary Taylor was forced to end his offensive in South Florida, and he marched his army over 100 miles back to Tampa. So they had to, they were forced to end. They couldn't beat him right there. They had to go back. They had to go right. They had to march their asses right back up to Tampa Bay. They couldn't beat Reuben right there, man. That's that excellency of power. A very powerful tribe. Once again, that word power, the word powerful. You know what I mean? What fierce, mighty. You know. Now I'm gonna go down right, and okay, right here, because remember one of the chiefs of the Seminoles was this man Halada Miko, no, known as Billy Bowlegs, right? Now here it says years in. This is what I was trying to get at before. It says years later in 1852, Seminole chief Halada Miko, also known as Billy Bowlegs, visited Washington, right? And on being escorted through the buildings of the Capitol and viewing many statues and paintings, he suddenly halted before a portrait of Zachary Taylor, right? That man, that was fighting the Seminoles, right? It says grinned and exclaimed, "Me whip," meaning which means I beat him. So he was so this chief was walking through the U.S. Capitol and seeing a painting of this man Zachary Taylor. Bear me just 1 second. I might gotta pause real quick. Salaki. All right. Salaki. But so this man's walking through this chief is walking through the Capitol. He sees this picture of Zachary Taylor, and he grinned and said, "I beat him." you know, that's the excellency of dignity, man. It says there are now over four thriving Seminole Indian reservations located in South Florida, one of which is in Okeechobee County, the location of the battle. Okay, so it's man, I'm going to read this up here too. I'm at it. 26 U.S. soldiers, including the majority of Taylor's officers and NCOs, were killed, with 112 wounded. It says against with 112 wounded against 11 Seminoles killed and 14 wounded. The Seminole warriors had specifically targeted the U.S. military officers during the battle. The battle stopped Taylor's troops from further advancing south, and no Seminoles were captured. Although Taylor's scouts did capture 100 ponies and 600 head of cattle the day after the battle, in guerrilla warfare fashion, the Seminole warriors had successfully held off the U.S. troops long enough for their people to evacuate their encampment, and they then withdrew across Lake Okeechobee on their canoes. Due to the large amount of casualties that Zachary Taylor's army suffered, they were forced to retreat over 100 miles back to Tampa. Man, you can't tell me that so-called Seminole Indians ain't the tribe of Reuben, man. All right, but so that was that. Now moving on, this man Osceola. Okay, so Osceola. All right, this is a picture of him. I brought him up before, but it's Osceola. All right, says just a little bit about him. It says Osceola, named Billy Powell at birth in Alabama, became an influential leader of the Seminole people in Florida. I believe they teach about him in school a little bit. It says his mother was Muskogee and his great grandfather was a Scotsman, James McQueen. He was reared by his mother in Crete, Muskogee tradition. When he was a child, they migrated to Florida with other Red Stick refugees, led by relative Peter McQueen after their groups defeated in 1814 in the Creek Wars. There they became part of what was known as the Seminole people. In 1836, Osceola led a small group of warriors in the Seminole resistance during the Second Seminole War. When the United States tried to remove the tribe from their lands in Florida to Indian territory west of the Mississippi River, he became an advisor to Micanopy, the principal chief of the Seminole from 1845 to 1849. I read about him too. Osceola led the Seminole resistance to removal until he was captured on October 21st, 1837, by deception under a flag of truce when he went to a site near Fort Payton for peace talks. That's just the thing about a so-called white man. All right, and they got one of another someone else of the Northern Kingdom, I believe, in regarding the tribe of Zebulon. You know, they caught someone else like that, man. All right, under a false flag of truce or peace. But it's the book of Psalms 55 and 21. This is just something. This is a characteristic of the so-called white man. It says the words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. See, because they talk peace, they don't know how to talk peacefully to you to draw you out, you know. But really, their true intent is war. Is to be destructive. This is the devil the Bible speaks of, man. Even with this dude Donald Trump now, they do all, they. And when Joe Biden was coming in office, they have these this peaceful way of speaking to you to make you believe and trust them, and boom, once they got you, man. You know, it's like a snake, and the so-called white man in the Bible is likened to a snake. But it says his words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Okay, so it's the same thing here. You know, it says the United States first imprisoned him, so they captured this man. They captured Osceola. I said the United States first imprisoned him at Fort Marion and St. Augustine and transported him to Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina. He died there a few months later, causes reported as internal infection or malaria. Because of his renown, Osceola attracted visitors to prison, including renowned artist George Catlin. This guy, all right. He says George, he was looking at him a little bit more. Says who painted perhaps the most well-known portrait of the Seminole leader. This portrait here. Okay, now I just want to down to where it says capture and death. Right, I'm not reading all of it. Right, but so all right, I'm gonna read this on October. Let me just see where the point I wanted to get. Okay, it's at the third paragraph. So I'm gonna read the first and the third. It says on October 21st, 1837, Osceola and 81 of his followers were captured by General Joseph Hernandez on the orders of General Thomas Jessup, that devil, under a white flag of truce. When he went for peace talks to Fort Payton near St. Augustine, he was initially imprisoned at Fort Marion in St. Augustine before being transferred to Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island outside Charleston, South Carolina. Bear me 1 second. But it says, all right, it says Osceola's capture by the sea caused a national uproar. General Jessup's treacherous act and the administration were condemned by many congressional leaders and vilified by international press. Jessup suffered a loss of reputation that lasted for the rest of his life. His betrayal of the truce flag has been described as one of the most disgraceful acts in American military history. This is all furthermore reason why would you ever want to fight for this country, man? You have some you Israelites in the war. I mean, in the army. You shouldn't be in the army. And this is a picture of Osceola's grave. Osceola, patriot and warrior, died at Fort Moultrie, January 30th, 1838. Okay, but I'm gonna jump down, right, because they had got him captured, right. That's Osceola, having suffered from chronic malaria since 1836 and having acute tonsillitis as well, developed an abscess. When he was close to death, as his last wish, he asked the attendant doctor, Frederick Whedon, that his body be returned to Florida, his home, so that he might rest in peace. He died of quinsy, right? So on January 30th, 1838, 3 months after his capture, rather than honoring his last wish, Whedon cut off Osceola's head and buried his decapitated body, displaying the Seminole leader's head in his drugstore. During the time Whedon had the head in his possession, he would often place it in the bedroom of his 3 sons as punishment for misbehavior. Whedon would later give the head to his son-in-law, Dr. Daniel Whitehurst, who gifted the head to Valentine Mott in 1843. Mott placed it in surgical, and this is Valentine Mott right here. Mott placed it in a surgical and pathological museum where it's presumed destroyed in a fire in 1866. All right, but it said he cut off his head and everything. All right, you know, and man, you know, it shows you, man, this so-called white man is not your friend. Okay, you know, and this is a picture of his wife and child. I showed his wife and child. All right, now here, right, I wanted to read this too. Okay. Now, since 1830s, resistance and war leader through the 1820s and the turn of the decade, American settlers continued pressuring the U.S. government to remove the Seminole from Florida to make way for the desired agricultural development. So here it is. You got Esau, you know, trying to press the U.S. government to, you know, you can imagine like get these doggone Seminoles out of this land, move them now, you know, for their what agricultural development, right? Since 1832, a few Seminole chiefs signed the Treaty of Paisley. And the thing is, all right, because I have typed up why are the Seminoles called unconquered peoples, right? Because you know they have that term now, but it says the Seminoles are called the unconquered people because they fiercely resisted forced removal from their land by the U.S. government. We seen, you know, read about that during the Seminole Wars, never signing a peace treaty, successfully evading capture by largely retreating into the Florida Everglades, allowing us, you know. And the thing is, as Pastor Hart was saying, he's breaking it down. You know, there is, you know, some peace treaties signed, but pretty much not for the most part. All right, you got some signing peace treaties, but not for the most part. It says allowing a small group to maintain their presence in their ancestral territory. Essentially, they were never fully conquered by the U.S. military. Okay, and you have, you know, unconquered people that's federally recognized, meaning recognized by the U.S. government. Okay, and the fact they call themselves unconquered people just goes to show you what unstable as water. Okay, type Reuben being unstable as water, man. All right, but continuing on. So it says in 1832, a few Seminole chiefs signed the Treaty of Payne's Landing. Let me just close that out. Oh, I think I got something else in there too. I said, why are Seminoles called unconquered people? You know, they just, you know, pretty much evaded capture, say, you know, and they pretty much resisted Esau, you know, trying to force and remove them out of their land. You know, they resisted fiercely. And once this is because they fiercely resisted. Didn't we read that word for power in the Hebrew is eyes, which means fierce? One of those words means fierce. Okay. I'll close that out now. Going back here, right? It says in 1832, a few Seminole chiefs signed the Treaty of Payne's Landing, by which they agreed to give up their Florida lands in exchange for lands west of the Mississippi River in Indian Territory. So, according to legend, Osceola stabbed the treaty with his knife. Although there are no contemporary reports of this, Donald L. Fixico, an American Indian historian, says he made a research trip to the National Archives, right, to see the original Treaty of Fort Gibson, which is this treaty, says, and that upon close inspection, It says he observed that it had a small triangular hole shaped like the point of a knife blade. So this man he had observed that, the original treaty, all right, and he's seen that in the treaty, in the paper, it had like a small, it says a small triangular hole shape, or like the point of a knife blade. Okay, and then you have this picture, this statue here. It says Osceola stabbing the treaty with his dagger. Okay, which I mean I can believe it because Reuben, once again, excellency of dignity. They stabbed the treaty. That's dignity right there, man. They stabbed the treaty, man. You see the face, definitely dignity. Okay. But yeah, man. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring out about, what I wanted to bring out about them. All right. Now, I guess I can close these out now. All right. But yeah, Genesis 49:4. So I'm reading verse 3. Reuben, now my firstborn, might in the beginning of my strength. They were the firstborn son of Jacob, the excellency of dignity. And now we understand, the excellency of dignity. And you still see Reubenites today with this, um, characteristic. It says in the excellency of power. And we read that. We read about, how they, the excellency of power, man. Verse 4, unstable as water. They are very warlike type of tribe. They're a warrior tribe. Here it is, First Chronicles chapter 5 and verse 18. The sons of Reuben and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, of valiant men able to bear a buckler and sword, and to shoot with a bow, and skillful in war, were 40,004,703 score. So 44,760 that went out to the war. So they're a warrior tribe. Another precept. First Chronicles chapter 12 and verse 37. And on the other side of Jordan are the Reubenites and the Gadites, the half tribe of Manasseh, with all manner of instruments of war for the battle, 120,000. Okay. So yeah, and we can see we can see how they're a warlike tribe. We went through the history just now. Okay. And moving on back to Genesis 49. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because even though they are a powerful tribe, and they caused Esau to come to a stalemate, and they had to book it over 100 miles back to Tampa. All right, they weren't able to bring down Esau. It says, "Thou shalt not excel." Because look, I got type right here. Did the Seminoles completely beat the U.S.? And it says, no, the Seminoles were not able to completely defeat the United States. Okay. How did the U.S. forces finally defeat the Seminole Indians in Florida, 1842? They lured the Seminole chief into a trap with the promise of a peace settlement. All right. So, but ultimately, they never were able to completely defeat the United States, because that would be against prophecy, man. Because it's prophecy that the so-called white man, he will come over here, and take down Gad, Reuben, all right, etc. Daniel chapter 7. And verse 21. Now it says, I beheld in the same horn, which the horn you read about is America in this chapter. All right, that's this specific horn here. It says, I beheld in the same horn made war with the saints. And the saints, according to Psalms chapter 148 and verse 14, are the Israelites. All right, this has prevailed against them. And when did this happen? When the so-called white men came over here, took down Gad, Reuben, which are the so-called Native American and Seminole Indians, enslaved the Southern Kingdom, brought them over here in slave ships. All right. So this was a part of prophecy. The prophet Daniel has seen this, thousands of years ago, man. He wrote about it thousands of years ago. All right. So they weren't, so even though they were powerful, they still couldn't, they weren't, it wasn't meant for them to take down Esau right then and there. Okay. Because then that would have upset prophecy. Okay. And ultimately it's the Lord that, Didn't let it happen. All right, but in the end, we're gonna win for sure. All right, all the 12 tribes of Israel in the end. It's gonna start with the elect. It says, because thou went up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. And because Reuben slept with his father Jacob's concubine. Get that account real quick. Genesis 35 and 22. I'm gonna start from verse 21. It says, in Israel, talking about Jacob journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. Verse 22. And it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. Okay, so that's what it's referring to when it says here in Genesis 49. Wait a second. Let me pull it back up. Genesis chapter 49 and verse 4, it says, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defilest thou it. He went to my couch. Okay. So that's what it's referring to. Now, going here, let me just see. Oh, and by the way, just getting all the meat off the bones again. Typed in which Seminole War was the bloodiest. It says the Seminole War is considered the bloodiest of the Seminole Wars, with the most casualties and the highest cost of the U.S. government in terms of both money and lives lost. It's been from 1835 to 1842. All right. But yeah, all right. So moving on now to Deuteronomy 33. Now, once again, this is a chapter where Moses blessed the nation of Israel, the different tribes individually, different tribes individually, right? Deuteronomy chapter 33 and starting in verse 4. Moses commanded us a law, even the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun when the heads of the people and the tribes of Israel gathered together. Verse 6. Let Reuben live and not die, and not his men be few, because as the apostle Tahar was stating that Esau come over here, he would have, Esau, if it was left to him, he pretty much exterminate, get rid of, the tribes, okay? When he came over here and did what he did, and did with tribe of Reuben, he would have exterminated Reuben. He would have, completely wiped him out. But the spirit of but the Lord, was with him. That's why, that is why he didn't wipe him out. Okay? Let Reuben live and not die. Let not his men be few. Okay? So Reuben, going to stay in there. Okay? Now, yeah, man. All right. So that's, tribe of Reuben, man. Okay. It's a lengthy lesson. All right. I wanted to get some history on it, touch on it. So, that's all I got to bring out for tribe of Reuben, at least right now. So, the Lord was edifying, giving all the praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Shai, Bahashim, Kakodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. I well. Peace, blessings, and citations to the elect. Shalom to the elect.